Well, as
horrific.
I tell the children or groups whom we talk to, I still cannot comprehend that something like that could happen. But then you start reading books on history, you see where in Germany the discrimination and all in lots of places in Europe has been there for centuries, and people were ill-educated, the press was censored, and they only got the news which the authorities felt was appropriate, and Hitler built on it. That's why there was so little general resistance to what he was doing.
Did you
Because,
know anything that was happening? Did the
well, of course,
underground, did you hear any rumors?
we did not know what was really happening because there was no way of communicating, and the only thing we had were the German newspapers and the radio, and of course that all was the Germans were wonderful, and everybody else was out to get them. And they had a complex of superiority, and everybody else they could do with what they pleased. That's why they started all the wars. You know, in their history, they say that the War of 1871 was started by the French. The Second World War was started. The First World War was started by the Allies, which of course wasn't true. But that was the belief of the Germans, and all of us didn't know any different. And my father was a German soldier in the First World War. And when he was in Liège with the German army, he sent a postcard home. And when I was in Liège with the American army, I sent the very same postcard to the States. I mean, it's such an idiotic thing what happened, such a unnecessary, brutal world.
When were you able to get out? How old were you?
I was 16. I left in 1941.
1941.
And through HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, who brought over 1,000 children over a period of 10 years, which was not publicized in order not to get any paid publicity, you know, and because of the United States, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in those days, and they were not at all happy to bring a lot of refugees to the United States, just like now the same thing is going on. But the immigration policies.
So you got here.
I'm
How
sorry.
old were you
I was 16
when you got to New York?
when we landed in New York on Labor Day 1941, which I believe was the 2nd of September, because Pearl Harbor was 7th of December. And we were one of the last ships to come from Europe to the States before the war, and I even got an envelope with the name of the ship on there, which I had on the ship. Among the pictures, you know, yes.
What year? I'm sorry, did you say you arrived? 1941?
1941.
1941.
Before your time.
Let's see.
Slightly.
Yeah, almost 30 years before my time.
Right.
It was you and your parents?
Just myself.
Just yourself. Where were your parents?
My father died in 1938, December 30th, 1938.
War-related?
No, not war-related.
And your mother?
Pernicious anemia. And my mother was sent to the camp in March of 1942,
Do you remember what camp?
Auschwitz.
And
Yes.
she never came back.
Well, not many people came back.
And siblings?
My brother left Germany in 1938, and he went to New York, and I met him when I was in New York.
How did you escape going to Auschwitz when your mother went?
No, I was in the States.
You were already here.
I was already here with 42,
That's right.
and I left in 41, so it was about half a year after I left.
How did you find out she left for Auschwitz?
Well, I found out later through the Red Cross.
The Red Cross. So when you left her, she wasn't able to come.
We tried to get her out through Cuba, and it was just not enough time.
So you came by yourself.
Yes.
So you arrived in New York, 16 years old, completely alone. No family here?
Well, I had elderly cousins and my brother, and I spent a stay with them, and I went to work.
Did you speak English at the time?
Yes, I had learned English in Germany already.
Excuse me. Can I help you?
Yes, I'm Westfield.
Oh, okay, sir. I'll help you.
You want me to sit here?
Sure, if you'd like to, that would be fine. Sorry, we had a do not knock sign on the door. What, what is that? Do you hear the buzzing?
It's a scanner.
Oh. You arrived in New York, you were 16 years old. You spoke some English that you had learned.
Yes.
Where did you go to work?
I went to work in a printing place where my brother worked.
Okay. You were there without your parents, obviously. Your father
Yes,
had passed
right,
away, your mother had gone to Auschwitz, but at the time you didn't know that.
Right.
Had you been trying to find your mother or contact her from New York?
Well, we had written back and forth. I even got some letters yet from my mother.
Do you still have them?
Yes, which she wrote to my brother at the time, and people whom, the cousins whom he lived with. And I started translating some of them for my children, but it didn't get very far. Matter of fact, I got them on my desk in a brown envelope.
When you look back on what happened, were you a religious person? Were you raised religious?
Well, we
Observant?
would go to synagogue in the high holidays, and we had a synagogue in our town, which, due to the fact that many of the Jewish inhabitants had emigrated, was sold to the daughter of one of the Jewish inhabitants who had married a Gentile, and they lived there. And then we went to synagogue in Alsbach, which is about 3 miles east. And we would walk in the fall, especially on the holidays. I would walk to that synagogue.
When you look at what happened, there was somebody that was here today who said, after seeing the Jews and what happened to them, that he had heard somebody say there could not have been a God in heaven.
Well, God is an individual opinion or attitude, because I feel God is within you, not outside of you. And God is, He's there, but I guess human beings, what they are over the centuries, God has not interfered the way I see it. And we live a long life. Some people, some families have all the difficulties you can imagine. Others, everything is right, so there's no way to figure it out. I've been fortunate, I must say, that I've had a charmed life, that I wasn't married. Many narrow escapes, and I'm still here.
There's a survivor who said she escaped 6 weeks after Kristallnacht. And when she looks back and meets other survivors who were not so lucky, who were forced to go to camps, said she feels overwhelming guilt for having, by serendipitous luck, escaped. Do you ever feel that way?
When we talk to classes, and I've had a couple of children ask me if I feel guilty, because I'm here and the others are not. So I tell them, yes, I feel guilty because so many did not survive. So many went through hell, even if they survived. But perhaps I was spared in order to talk to you today and to tell you what has happened, and for you to visualize what can happen if you're not alert, if you read and not discriminate what you read and what you hear, what you see on the internet. So I feel that might be a reason I survived. So I put a positive attitude on it.
How do you explain that kind of evil, that level of inhumanity to your children?
I don't think there's an explanation. I mean, there's so many. I mean, even nowadays you read stories, of course some of them are exaggerated. You always got to be skeptical about some of the books you read, because they can't remember everything they write in a book, and it wasn't necessarily so. And I'm always a little skeptic of what I hear, even about survivors, what they went through. Not that I don't think they're intentionally doing it, but the recollection isn't always there.
When you look back during that time, not the time in New York, but before that, what do you remember the most?
Well, I have forgotten a lot. I cannot recall my early years in Germany. I got only very limited memory, because when I was trying to remember if I had a bar mitzvah in Germany when I was 13, I don't remember. So I had a bar mitzvah, my 50th anniversary here in Nashville, and all the kids came and other people. And it was a very emotional affair. I gave a speech, and everybody got very emotional when I gave my speech.
What did you talk about?
About myself, my background, and how I feel about everything. I think I have it somewhere around the house in my files.
Do you think that whole bar mitzvah was symbolic of your freedom, symbolic of...
Oh, of course it was demonstrated to my children that we can survive and we can prosper. And I think even I are fortunate. We have a wonderful family and grandchildren, and we speak to each other.
I know you've been spending a lot of time with your grandchildren.
Well, some of them, of course, some of them are little, and 3-year-old you can't really talk much about, and 7-year-old isn't quite ready to talk about, but our older grandchildren are aware of what has happened.
Are they okay when you tell them? Do they find it hard to believe?
Well, they're still not too focused on it, because, there's time frame, and it's hard to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, especially after a long period of time.
What do you want people to know about what happened?
Well, I want them to know the truth, and as I tell people whom I talk to, that people are capable of a lot of bad things, unless they're educated, unless it starts in the family, basically. If children are brought up the right way, they'll be okay. And of course, many books have been written. I'm sure you've seen A Constantine's Sword. And also, I'm reading a book, The Pity of It All.
Never heard of that one.
Which details the history of the Jews who lived in Germany, how they were discriminated against. When Moses Mendelssohn, back in 1740s, eventually he was one of the most renowned philosophers in Europe. But when he went to Berlin as a young man, he had to go through a gate which was reserved for animals and Jews. And the kings, they were all rabid, were made laws specifically for the Jews. I mean, it's a sad world, and you see what's going on now, because Jews are dehumanized, especially in the Arab press, in the Arab movies, and in the TV. I mean, it's terrible. The lies that can be told and believed, because they believed that the Jews were involved in the destruction of the World Towers. I mean, that's so far-fetched for us, but educated people in the Arab countries believe it. It just shows you how the minds can be twisted. Of course, Hitler was the first one who had the big lie. You know, if you tell a lie often enough, people will believe it.
The person who tells it will believe it.
That too, yes.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I went back with 3 of our children in 2000, back to Europe, back to my hometown. And
How was that? How was that?
it was liberating in the sense that I felt comfortable, which I didn't know I would, because the previous times I had gone back I wasn't comfortable. And I talked to 2 classes in the high school where American money and had built a comprehensive school from bottom up in that area. And the students were well educated and asked intelligent questions. Matter of fact, one of the girls said she was half Jewish. She wanted to go to Israel, but her dad didn't want to go. And the 2 teachers who taught us 2 classes told us they had gone to Boston to study facing history in ourselves, and that's something I didn't expect. And we went to the city hall where they gave us books and coffee and cookies and that sort of thing, welcomed us, and all in all, and the most important thing is on Saturday we went to the synagogue in Darmstadt, and which had been a beautiful building, which had been officially opened in 1988, and I had been there in 1938 when it was burned. So that was a very emotional experience for me, because I was called to the Torah. So my 2 sons, of course the synagogue was separate, women were upstairs and men downstairs. So, matter of fact, we were in Rochester last week, and my son says he still thinks about it at the synagogue. He gets emotional every time he thinks about it. So this strange world.
Is there anything?
And I met a lady there who was very active. Her husband had died about a year or 2 earlier in the Jewish community in Darmstadt. And she told us that she had met her husband in a camp where the men were separated from the woman, and through the fence they had promised each other to wait for each other. So when everybody left the camp, she stayed behind till he came and they got married.
Oh, it's a beautiful story.
Yes. And a lot of humanizing stories you hear. And we were at my sons want to take pictures of the synagogue. It was such a beautifully light and airy building. It was a beautiful place. They want to take pictures. Of course, you don't take pictures on Shabbat. So we came back on Monday and took pictures. Then every Monday they go to what they call a coffee house. So we had coffee and cake with a number of people in the coffee house. And one lady was there who had lived in Frankfurt, gone to Scotland and come back. At the time she was 83 years old, a very wonderful lady. And the daughter of that lady I just mentioned was there with her husband, and a lady who was from France who lived there now. So it was a very emotional, very interesting time we had.
Yeah. Eric, thank you so much. I know
Okay.
you and Eva do this all the time, and it must get very difficult as the older you
Well,
get.
it's always difficult.
And I am honored to have been able to share this with you. And I thank you.
Okay.
We're going to take your story and put it in the exhibit, and
Okay.
hopefully a book and a documentary.
Actually, I just got an email which I get weekly from the West End Synagogue, and a lady from the public library here is asking for stories about veterans which are different. So I called her, so she's going to send me some forms, whatever, fill out. So perhaps I can tell that story in a different venue.
One of the interesting things that I remember now is that you actually went back and fought in Germany, isn't that right?
Yes, I was a soldier.
So do you find that difficult? to
No,
go
not
back?
at all. I mean, of course, we had every reason to fight, every reason to go in the army.
Wait a minute. I'm remembering something, and I really want you to talk to me about this if you don't mind. Were you not in a Jeep
Yeah.
with the man who sent your mother to Auschwitz?
Well, he actually sent her to Darmstadt, which was a collection point. Yeah,
I want you to
I
tell
was,
this to me again, because I remember reading this now, and I want you, if you don't mind,
no,
to take a few minutes to tell me this. You came to the United States at 16. You were in New York. You were
moved to Chicago.
Moved to Chicago. Did you enlist or
No,
you were
I was
drafted?
drafted when I was 18. I was drafted.
You were drafted to the Army?
I was drafted in the army,
Into the
and
Army.
of course you get an interview, and they ask you all kinds of questions, there are all kinds of tests. So the interviewer told me, well, you've got a higher IQ than I have, you'll go to school. Next morning I was on a troop train to Georgia, and had 17 weeks of basic infantry training. And then I was since I had to be 19 to be sent overseas, I went to Camp Venton, Mississippi. Then when I was 19, I went overseas on the Aquitania, a big ship, which went all by itself, about 7,000 soldiers and nurses on that ship. And we landed in Greenock, Scotland. Then we went by train from Greenock to Somerset in England. And from there we went to Birmingham, or not Birmingham, whatever. Then we went across the channel on a ship and landed at Omaha Beach about 2 months after the invasion.
So ironically, you're both a survivor and a liberator.
Well, I don't know how much of a liberator I was, but I was a replacement depot through France into Belgium till they looked for German-speaking people. Like now they look for Arab-speaking people. In any case, they finally found my records, had misplaced them. That's why I was still in replacement depot. Half an hour before the trucks went back to Paris, they found my records in the files of a different battalion. And that was about 3 weeks before the Ardennes offensive. I was in that very area where the Battle of the Bulge was.
Wow.
So I went back to Paris with the became military intelligence service. Then we were attached to the 103rd Infantry Division, where 5 of us with 2 jeeps and a trailer, and went down to Alsace-Lorraine. And then with the division we went first we went east into Germany, across the Rhine at Worms, and we were the occupying force for the time being, and I was attached to CIC in the very territory where I used to live. So I rounded up all the soldiers who had been released that didn't have discharge paper. I sent them to a POW camp. Then I took the mayor in my jeep and took him for a ride, and he didn't expect to come back alive. And I asked him about my mother. So he said he was told to send her and also my uncle to Darmstadt, a collection point. And of course I had a pistol. I could have killed when the war was still on, so nobody would
Why
would have said anything,
Why didn't you kill him?
because I didn't feel it was right for me to do so. I mean, what have I accomplished if I kill him? I only feel guilt, and I have no direct knowledge that he did any physical harm to anybody. I mean, you don't shoot people for, no matter what the circumstances are.
So in the face of that kind of, it's almost as if that coincidence was laid upon you, really showed you what you were made of and who you really were.
Well, I don't know. I don't see him. I mean, we are all made up that way. We
Do you
don't.
see how extraordinary that coincidence is, though?
How's that?
Do you see how extraordinary
Oh, that I
is?
go back, yeah.
That you went back and wound up in the Jeep with the man who, in many ways, led your mother to her death.
Well,
Started her
if
journey.
he wouldn't have, somebody else would have, because that was a general policy. I
Did
mean,
you
if I
ever-
had some direct knowledge of somebody doing something physically to anybody else, I might have felt differently about it.
Did he know it was you?
Of course.
Did you know? Did you two talk? Did he say anything to you?
Well, I don't remember any conversation we had. I just asked him about my mother and my uncle and what happened. And but he was Catholic, and he had the rosaries in his hand. But and then I had other. I used to go out in my Jeep by myself, and when there was a problem, to find out and interpret, and they wouldn't let me go out by myself anymore. Too dangerous. And we had an ankle iron in front of the Jeep, which had a notch in it because they would string wires across the road. You know, when you come in a Jeep, the wire take your head off. I mean, there was a war going on. And when we were in Alsace, I was with G2, which is the headquarters, and we would go out reconnaissance in no man's land. Me and a couple of recon captains and a major from Corpus Christi. He was a gang type of a guy. One time we came upon a house, there were voices inside. So a couple of them went around to the back, and I went in front at the carbine, and they opened the door, and there was a family sitting at dinner. You know, and asking questions, you know, if any soldiers, anything going on. But going to no man's land, all of a sudden everybody hit the ground when mortar shells were coming in. I mean, things like that.